Hey everyone. So let's take a look at the teams that missed the playoffs this season and look at which teams right now sit in a good position with a good roster who could certainly make the jump and make the playoffs next season. Now, I understand that it's really early to do this. We haven't had the draft yet. We haven't had free agency yet. There's potential for trades over the summer. A lot of things can change between now and the start of next season. But let's look at the teams that right now are in good shape and really have a decent shot of being a playoff team next year. So here we have all the teams that missed the playoffs this season in the West and in the East. Um, so let's start at the bottom because there's some teams we can throw away right out of the gate. Arizona is a long way away. No matter what they do, I think they are quite a ways away from being a playoff team. They've got some good young talent. Antti Ranta was pretty good when he was healthy in net for this season, but he wasn't healthy for much of the year. So that remains a question mark if he can put a whole season together. Their defense, I think, is okay. I don't think they have enough depth up front. I still think that they're a ways away from being a playoff team. So Arizona, I'm going to say no. Vancouver, similar situation. They have some really good young talent. I don't trust their goaltending, however, and I still think they're a little ways away. Edmonton. Edmonton made the playoffs last playoffs, missed it this year. They were expected to be one of the better teams in the league this year, and they completely imploded, especially on the back end. They have Connor McDavid. They have some strong forwards up front. Their defense is a big issue, however, and Cam Talbot, when he stood on his head 2 seasons ago, was unbelievable and got them into the playoffs. When he was average last season, the Edmonton were a long way out as far as the playoff picture is concerned. So Edmonton has an interesting offseason ahead of them. They can make some moves to sure things up, mostly on the back end and maybe with some depth up front. They could potentially be a playoff team, but I really don't see it. I think they've got too many holes, and it's going to be another disappointing year next year for Edmonton, unless they make some drastic move that brings in a top defenseman. But Calgary, another team that was expected to be good this year, and really fell short of those expectations. They've changed coaches. They're going to make some moves this offseason, you have to think. If they go into next year with the same roster, it's going to be the same thing all over again. They need to make some changes. If they can do that, then they certainly have a shot at making the playoffs, although it will be far from a guarantee. Chicago had a horrible year this year, and I don't see it getting that much better. Now, Corey Crawford missed almost his entire season with vertigo. If he can come back and be the goaltender that he has shown that he can be in the past, then that's going to boost their win total. They have some really good young players, most notably Nick Schmaltz and Alex DeBrincat. Those two are fantastic young players. However, Jonathan Toews is on the decline. Duncan Keith and Brent Seabrook are on the decline. Their defense core as a whole leaves a lot to be desired. I do not see Chicago in the playoffs again next year, and I think if you're the Blackhawks, you got to be thinking, kind of a quick rebuild on the fly here. I'm not saying get rid of everybody, but you've got to get some young talent in here, more than just a couple of players, and kind of put something together, because they are not headed in a very good direction right now. And after years on top, that's what happens. When you're on the top for as long as Chicago was, you get late round draft picks. You just don't have, you get players that take up a lot of cap space because they have larger contracts. You can't stay at the top forever. I think Chicago needs to look into going into a quick rebuild and try and turn things around fairly quickly, similar to what the Boston Bruins did. I think they were in the Cup final in 2013. They lost in the playoffs in 2014. Then they missed the playoffs for a couple of years. And then this past year, they almost won the East. So they turned it around very quickly in just a couple of years. Chicago needs to look into trying to do the same thing. Dallas was supposed to be a playoff team. And somehow, well, it's not somehow, they got bad goaltending and mediocre defense. But they didn't make the playoffs, even though they were expected to. Last offseason, they went out and made a bunch of changes. They supposedly won the offseason, but it didn't translate to on-the-ice success. Injuries didn't help. But they certainly are a team that could make the playoffs. If they can get consistent goaltending, if Ben Bishop can stay in the net instead of being injured for half the year, they certainly could and should be a playoff team. However, if injuries are a problem like they were this year and they get mediocre goaltending, then Dallas is going to be on the outside looking in again. And lastly, St. Louis. St. Louis should have been in the playoffs this year. They were in a playoff spot for basically the whole season. They have a tremendous roster. There's no excuse for them not to be in the playoffs. They got beat out by Colorado this past season, and that should be really embarrassing for the Blues, who, when you look at them on paper, absolutely are a playoff team. So, of all of these teams, I think that we might see 2 or 3 of them actually make the playoffs next year. There's some turnover every year as far as teams who make it one year and don't the next, and teams who don't make it the next. If I had to pick 3 teams who I think are have the best shot of making the playoffs out west that didn't make it this year, it's St. Louis, Dallas, and Calgary. Those are my 3 teams that I think have a really decent shot of being playoff teams next season. So now, let's head over to the East. In the East, let's start at the bottom again. Buffalo, they have the number 1 overall pick in June's draft. They're going to draft Rasmus Dahlin. One player is not going to fix their franchise that quickly. Dahlin is going to be a huge, huge help for them. I think he's going to have a long and very good career, but I don't think he automatically takes the worst team in the NHL and makes them a playoff team in 1 year. Jack Eichel continues to have injury problems, most notably with his ankle. If he can stay healthy, he's easily a point-per-game player, probably a 90-plus point guy. But he has not shown that he's able to stay healthy, and that's going to be an issue for the Sabres if that continues. I don't see Buffalo making it next year. I also don't see them being the worst team in the league. I think Dahlin will help them. I think if they can get some more production from their young forwards and less time out injured from their forwards, most notably Jack Eichel, they'll be a better team. They still have major issues in net with goaltending, and on the back end, I really don't like their defense as a whole, even adding Dahlin. So Buffalo is not going to be a playoff team. Ottawa is also not going to be a playoff team. They had a tremendous year, not this past season, but the year before. Went all the way to the conference final where they lost in 7 to Pittsburgh. That was their chance. That was their magical run. They absolutely fell flat on their faces this past season. Really, really bad year. Craig Anderson is he's an average, mediocre goaltender. He is not a great goalie. He had a great year a couple of years ago, but I think what you saw this past season is a much closer representation of where Craig Anderson is at this point. And Ottawa, I just don't think is a very good team. They have a few good players, but as a whole, they're not very good. Montreal, also as a whole, not very good. They have Carey Price, and if he can stay healthy, he's one of the best goalies in the league. They have serious issues on defense. Their defense core is atrocious. They have issues down the middle, up front. They have issues scoring goals. It's just problem after problem in Montreal. I think that their season's pretty much over before it even begins. Detroit. Detroit is, again, they're fleeting in that middle ground of mediocrity. They're not bad enough to get really good draft picks, but they're not good enough to be a playoff team either. If I was Detroit, I'd go into full tank mode. I don't know why they haven't yet. I don't know if they're holding on to some stupid glimmer of hope that they think that they can sneak in and make a run. They don't nearly have the team for that. They have some good young players, guys like Anthony Mantha, Tyler Bertuzzi. They have some good young pieces, but as a whole, their team is not good. And I don't see them anywhere near the playoffs next year. Florida almost made the playoffs this year. If it wasn't for such a horrendous start to the season, they would have been a playoff team. They just missed out by a couple of points. I don't expect them to have such a bad start. Next season, I expect them to be a playoff team next season. I think they showed what they can do in the second half of this season, and they should be much improved next year, even more so than what they did this year. To the Metro now, the Rangers. The Rangers are in a rebuild at this point. I don't think there's anything that can happen with New York that's going to turn them around in one season or one off season and make them that much better next year. I think they need to focus on trying to get a quick turnaround, get as many draft picks as possible, see if you can hit a home run somewhere, and try and build a team that through the draft, and have them look to be good 3 or 4 years from now. Don't look to be good this season, because I don't think the Rangers are going to be very good next season. The Islanders, man, this is going to depend a lot on what John Tavares does. If he leaves, the Islanders are in huge trouble. Yes, they have some good young players, especially Matt Barzal. He's incredible. Their goaltending situation is a joke. They don't have you don't have a good starting goalie. You don't have a goalie who even deserves to be an NHL starter. Their defense is very average, and they have a decent forward group, but if Tavares leaves, that takes a huge hit. Even with Tavares, as this year proved, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily a playoff team. So I think the Islanders are not in great shape. And lastly, Carolina. Carolina, they changed coaches. They fired Bill Peters. A lot of people picked them to be a playoff team for this season and these playoffs now. They fell short. They didn't make it. Kind of a disappointing year for them. Goaltending continues to be a big problem. Scott Darling was not the starter that they were hoping he would be. They have some really, really good young talent. They've got a great young defense core. They just haven't been able to put it all together yet. Maybe next year will be the year with a new coach in there and another year of experience for their young guys. Maybe next year's the year that they put it together and squeak in as maybe a wild card team. So in the East, I expect much less turnover than in the West. I think your playoff teams this year in the East are by far your best teams, and it's going to be hard to knock any of them out. If I had to pick, I'm only going to pick two teams to make it to two non-playoff teams from this year to make it next year, because I really don't see much more turnover than that happening. I would say Buffalo's out for sure. Ottawa is out for sure. Montreal is out for sure. Detroit is like 80% out. Florida, I think, makes the playoffs next year. Florida and Carolina are the two teams that did not make the playoffs this year that I think will make it next year. The Rangers, they're not going to turn it around that quickly. And the Islanders, unless they somehow pull off a great trade for a high-level goaltender, they're not going to be a playoff team either. So when it comes down to it, in the West, this is as of right now, obviously a lot can change over free agency and the offseason and the draft, but the teams that I think that will make the playoffs next year that did not this year are St. Louis, Dallas, Calgary, Carolina, and Florida. So that's 5 teams that didn't make it this year that I think will next year. That number is kind of low. I think normally there's more than that. So we'll have to wait and see what happens this offseason, if any major changes happen. But where we're at right now, with this season not even over yet and still the Stanley Cup final to go, those are the teams that I think are in the best shape right now to make a run next year and actually get into the postseason. So, like, comment, share, subscribe. Follow Off the Wall Hockey on social media. Those links in the description. Check out offthewallhockey.com. That link's in the description. Let me know what you guys think about this. Who do you think of non-playoff teams this year? Who do you guys think make it next year? Let me know in the comments down below. Keep spreading the word about this channel. I love watching it grow. And thank you guys so much for watching. It's really awesome to see so many views and so many subscribers on this channel. I just hope that it continues. Thank you guys so much. Talk to you soon.